Section 3 of Satan's Diary by Leonid Andreyev, translated by Herman Bernstein. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolyn. February 7th, 1914. Rome, Hotel Internationale. I am driven mad whenever I am compelled to seize the club of a policeman to bring order in my brain. Facts to the right, thoughts to the left, moods to the rear, clear the road for His Highness Conscience, which barely moves about upon its stilts. I am compelled to do this, otherwise there would be a riot, an abracadabra, chaos. And so I call you to order, gentlemen, facts, and lady, thoughts. I begin. Night, darkness, the air is balmy, there is a pleasant fragrance. Toppy is enchanted. We are in Italy. Our speeding train is approaching Rome. We are enjoying our soft couches when suddenly, crash! Everything flies to the devil. The train has gone out of its mind. It is wrecked. I confess without shame that I am not very brave, that I was seized with terror and seemed to have lost consciousness. The lights were extinguished and with much labor I crawled out of the corner into which I had been hurled. I seemed to have forgotten the exit. There were only walls and corners. I felt something stinging and beating at me, and all about nothing but darkness. Suddenly I felt a body beneath my feet. I stepped right upon the face. Only afterwards did I discover that the body was that of George, my lackey, killed outright. I shouted and my obliging Toppy came to my aid. He seized me by the arm and led me to an open window, as both exits had been barricaded by fragments of the car and baggage. I leaped out, but Toppy lingered behind. My knees were trembling. I was groaning, but still he failed to appear. I shouted. Suddenly he reappeared at the window and shouted back, "What are you crying about? I am looking for our hats and your portfolio." A few moments later he returned and handed me my hat. He himself had his silk top hat on and carried the portfolio. I shook with laughter and said, "Young man, you have forgotten the umbrella." But the old buffoon has no sense of humor. He replied seriously, "I do not carry an umbrella. And do you know, our George is dead and so is the chef." So this fallen carcass which has no feelings and upon whose face one steps with impunity is our George. I was again seized with terror and suddenly my eyes were pierced with groans, wild shrieks, whistling and cries. All the sounds wherewith these braves wail when they are crushed. At first I was deafened. I heard nothing. The cars caught fire. The flames and smoke shot up into the air. The wounded began to groan and, without waiting for the flesh to roast, I darted like a flash into the field. What a leap! Fortunately the low hills of the Roman Campagna are very convenient for this kind of sport, and I was no means behind in the line of runners. When, out of breath, I hurled myself upon the ground, it was no longer possible to hear or see anything. Only Toppy was approaching. But what a terrible thing this heart is! My face touched the earth. The earth was cool, firm, calm, and here I liked it. It seemed as if it had restored my breath and put my heart back into its place. I felt easier. The stars above were calm. There was nothing for them to get excited about. They were not concerned with things below. They merely shine in triumph. That is their eternal ball. And at this brilliant ball the earth, clothed in darkness, appeared as an enchanting stranger in a black mask. Not at all badly expressed. I trust that you, my reader, will be pleased. My style and my manners are improving. I kissed Toppi in the darkness. I always kiss those I like in the darkness. And I said: "You are carrying your human form, Toppi, very well. I respect you. But what are we to do now? Those lights yonder in the sky, they are the lights of Rome, but they are too far away." "Yes, it is Rome," affirmed Toppi, and raised his hand. "Do you hear whistling?" From somewhere in the distance came the long-drawn, piercing, shrieking of locomotives. They were sounding the alarm. "Yes, they are whistling," I said, and laughed. "They are whistling," repeated Toppi, smiling. He never laughs. But here again I began to feel uncomfortable. I was cold, lonely, quivering. In my feet there was still the sensation of treading upon corpses. I wanted to shake myself like a dog after a bath. You must understand me. It was the first time that I had seen and felt your corpse, my dear reader, and if you pardon me, it did not appeal to me at all. Why did it not protest when I walked over its face? George had such a beautiful young face and he carried himself with much dignity. Remember, your face too may be trod upon, and will you too remain submissive? We did not proceed to Rome but went instead in search of the nearest night lodging. We walked long. We grew tired. We longed to drink. Oh, how we longed to drink! And now, permit me to present to you my new friend, Signor Thomas Magnus, and his beautiful daughter, Maria. At first we observed the faint flicker of a light. As we approached nearer, we found a little house, its white walls gleaming through a thicket of dark cypress trees and shrubbery. There was a light in one of the windows, the rest were barricaded with shutters. The house had a stone fence, an iron gate, strong doors, and silence. At first glance it all looked suspicious. Toppi knocked. Still silence. I knocked. Again silence. Finally there came a gruff voice asking from behind the iron door: "Who are you? What do you want?" Hardly mumbling with his parched tongue, my brave Toppi narrated the story of the catastrophe and our escape. He spoke at length and then came the click of a lock and the door was opened. Following behind our austere and silent stranger, we entered the house, passed through several dark and silent rooms, walked up a flight of creaking stairs into a brightly lighted room, apparently the stranger's workroom. There was much light, many books, with one open beneath a low lamp shaded by a simple green globe. We had not noticed this light in the field, but what astonished me was the silence of the house. Despite the rather early hour not a move, not a sound, not a voice was to be heard. "Have a seat." We sat down and Toppi, now almost in pain, began again to narrate his story. But the strange host interrupted him. "Yes, a catastrophe. They often occur in our roads. Were there many victims?" Toppi continued his prattle, and the host, while listening to him, took a revolver out of his pocket and hid it in a table drawer, adding carelessly: "This is not a particularly quiet neighborhood. Well, please remain here." For the first time he raised his dark eyebrows and his large dim eyes and studied us intently as if he were gazing upon something savage in a museum. It was an impolite and brazen stare. I arose and said: "I fear that we are not welcome here, Signor, and—" He stopped me with an impatient and slightly sarcastic gesture. "Nonsense, you remain here. I will get you some wine and food. My servant is here in the daytime only, so allow me to wait on you. You will find the bathroom behind this door. Go wash and freshen up while I get the wine. Make yourself at home." While we ate and drank, with savage relish I confess, this unsympathetic gentleman kept on reading a book as if there were no one else in the room, undisturbed by Toppi's munching and the dog's struggle with a bone. I studied my host carefully. Almost my height, his pale face bore an expression of weariness. He had a black, oily, bandit-like beard. But his brow was high and his nose betrayed good sense. How would you describe it? Well, here again I seek comparisons. Imagine the nose betraying the story of a great, passionate, extraordinary secret life. It is beautiful and seems to have been made not out of muscle and cartilage, but out of... what do you call it? Out of thoughts and brazen desires. He seems quite brave too, but I was particularly attracted by his hands, very big, very white, and giving the impression of self-control. I do not know why his hands attracted me so much, but suddenly I thought, how beautifully exact the number of fingers, exactly 10 of them, 10 thin, evil, wise, crooked fingers. I said politely, "Thank you, Signor." He replied, "My name is Magnus, Thomas Magnus. Have some wine, Americans?" I waited for Toppi to introduce me, according to the English custom, and I looked toward Magnus. One had to be an ignorant, illiterate animal not to know me. Toppi broke in: "Mr. Henry Wondergood of Illinois, his secretary, Irwin Toppi, your obedient servant. Yes, citizens of the United States." The old buffoon blurted out his tirade, evincing a thorough lack of pride, and Magnus, yes, he was a little startled. Billions, my friend, billions. He gazed at me long and intently. "Mr. Wondergood? Henry Wondergood? Are you not, sir, that American billionaire who seeks to bestow upon humanity the benefits of his billions?" I modestly shook my head in the affirmative. "Yes, I am the gentleman." Toppi shook his head in affirmation, the ass. "Yes, we are the gentlemen." Magnus bowed and said with a tinge of irony in his voice: "Humanity is awaiting you, Mr. Wondergood. Judging by the Roman newspapers, it is extremely impatient. But I must crave your pardon for this very modest meal. I did not know. I seized his large, strangely warm hand, and shaking it violently, in American fashion, I said: "Nonsense, Signor Magnus. I was a swineherd before I became a billionaire, while you are a straightforward, honest and noble gentleman whose hand I press with the utmost respect. The devil take it, not a single human face has yet aroused in me as much sympathy as yours." Magnus said, "Nothing. I cannot continue this I said, he said. This cursed consistency is deadly to my inspiration. It transforms me into a silly romanticist of a boulevard sheet and makes me lie like a mediocrity. I have 5 senses. I am a complete human being and yet I speak only of the hearing. And now about the sight? I assure you it did not remain idle, and this sensation of the earth, of Italy, of my existence which I now perceive with a new and sweet strength. You imagine that all I did was to listen to wise Thomas Magnus. He speaks and I gaze, understand, answer, while I think, what a beautiful earth, what a beautiful Campagna di Roma. I persisted in penetrating the recesses of the house, into its locked, silent rooms. With every moment my joy mounted at the thought that I am alive, that I can speak and play, and suddenly I rather liked the idea of being human. I remember that I held out my card to Magnus, Henry Wondergood. He was surprised, but laid the card politely on the table. I felt like implanting a kiss on his brow for his politeness, for the fact that he, too, was human. I, too, am human. I was particularly proud of my foot encased in a fine, tan leather shoe, and I persisted in swinging it. Swing on, beautiful, human, American foot. I was extremely emotional that evening. I even wanted to weep. To look my host straight in the eyes and to squeeze out of my own eyes, so full of love and goodness, 2 little tears. I actually did it, for at that moment I felt a little pleasant sting in my nose, as if it had been hit by a spurt of lemonade. I observed that my 2 little tears made an impression upon Magnus. But Toppi, while I experienced this wondrous poem of feeling human and even of weeping, he slept like a dead one at the very same table. I was rather angered. This was really going too far. I wanted to shout at him, but Magnus restrained me. He has had a good deal of excitement and is weary, Mr. Wondergood. The hour had really grown late. We had been talking and arguing with Magnus for 2 hours when Toppi fell asleep. I sent him off to bed while we continued to talk and drink for quite a while. I drank more wine, but Magnus restrained himself. There was a dimness about his face. I was beginning to develop an admiration for his grim and, at times, evil, secretive countenance. He said, "I believe in your altruistic passion, Mr. Wondergood, but I do not believe that you, a man of wisdom and of action, and, it seems to me, somewhat cold, could place any serious hopes upon your money. $3 billion, that is a mighty power, Magnus." "Yes, $3 billion, a mighty power indeed," he agreed rather unwillingly. "But what will you do with it?" I laughed. "You probably want to say what can this ignoramus of an American, this erstwhile swineherd, who knows swine better than he knows men, do with the money?" "The first business helps the other," said Magnus. "I dare say you have but a slight opinion of this foolish philanthropist whose head has been turned by his gold," said I. "Yes, to be sure, what can I do? I can open another university in Chicago, or another maternity hospital in San Francisco, or another humanitarian reformatory in New York." "The latter would be a distinct work of mercy," quoth Magnus. "Do not gaze at me with such reproach, Mr. Wondergood. I am not jesting. You will find in me the same pure love for humanity which burns so fiercely in you." He was laughing at me and I felt pity for him, not to love people. Miserable, unfortunate Magnus! I could kiss his brow with great pleasure, not to love people. "Yes, I do not love them," affirmed Magnus, But I am glad that you do not intend to travel the conventional road of all American philanthropists. Your billions... 3 billions, Magnus. One could build a nation on this money. Yes. Or destroy a nation, said I. With this gold, Magnus, one can start a war or a revolution. Yes. I actually succeeded in arousing his interests. His large white hands trembled slightly, and in his eyes there gleamed for a moment a look of respect. You, Wondergood, are not as foolish as I thought. He arose, paced up and down the room, and halting before me, asked sneeringly: "And you know exactly what your humanity needs most? The creation of a new or the destruction of the old state? War or peace? Rest or revolution? Who are you, Mr. Wondergood of Illinois, that you essay to solve these problems? You had better keep on building your maternity hospitals and universities. That is far less dangerous work." I liked the man's hauteur. I bowed my head modestly and said: "You are right, Signor Magnus. Who am I, Henry Wondergood, to undertake the solution of these problems? But I do not intend to solve them. I merely indicate them. I indicate them and I seek the solution. I seek the solution and the man who can give it to me. I have never read a serious book carefully. I see you have quite a supply of books here. You are a misanthrope, Magnus. You are too much of a European not to be easily disillusioned in things, while we, young America, believe in humanity. A man must be created. You in Europe are bad craftsmen and have created a bad man. We shall create a better one. I beg your pardon for my frankness. As long as I was merely Henry Wondergood, I devoted myself only to the creation of pigs, and my pigs, let me say to you, have been awarded no fewer medals and decorations than Field Marshal Moltke. But now I desire to create people." Magnus smiled. "You are an alchemist, Wondergood. You would transform lead into gold." "Yes, I want to create gold and I seek the philosopher's stone. But has it not already been found? It has been found, only you do not know how to use it. It is love. Ah, Magnus, I do not know yet what I will do, but my plans are heroic and magnificent. If not for that misanthropic smile of yours, I might go further. Believe in man, Magnus, and give me your aid. You know what man needs most." He said coolly and with sadness: "He needs prisons and gallows." I exclaimed in anger. I am particularly adept in feigning anger. "You are slandering me, Magnus. I see that you must have experienced some very great misfortune, perhaps treachery and... Hold on, Wondergood. I never speak of myself and do not like to hear others speak of me. Let it be sufficient for you to know that you are the first man in 4 years to break in upon my solitude, and this only due to chance. I do not like people." "Oh, pardon, but I do not believe it." Magnus went over to the bookcase and with an expression of supreme contempt he seized the first volume he laid his hands upon. "And you who have read no books," he said, "do you know what these books are about? Only about evil, about the mistakes and sufferings of humanity. They are filled with tears and blood, Wondergood. Look, in this thin little book which I clasp between 2 fingers is contained a whole ocean of human blood, and if you should take all of them together, And who has spilled this blood? The devil? I felt flattered and wanted to bow in acknowledgment, but he threw the book aside and shouted: "No, sir, man! Man has spilled this blood. Yes, I do read books, but only for one purpose: to learn how to hate man and to hold him in contempt. You, Wondergood, have transformed your pigs into gold, yes? And I can see how your gold is being transformed back again into pigs. They will devour you, Wondergood. But I do not wish either to prattle or to lie. Throw your money into the sea or build some new prisons and gallows. You are vain like all men. Then go on building gallows. You will be respected by serious people, while the flock in general will call you great. Or don't you, American from Illinois, want to get into the Pantheon?" "No, Magnus. Blood!" cried Magnus. "Can't you see that it is everywhere? Here it is on your boot now." I confess that at the moment Magnus appeared to be insane. I jerked my foot in sudden fear and only then did I perceive a dark, reddish spot on my shoe. How dastardly! Magnus smiled and immediately regaining his composure, continued calmly and without emotion: "I have unwittingly startled you, Mr. Wondergood. Nonsense, you probably stepped on something inadvertently. A mere trifle. But this conversation, a conversation I have not conducted for a number of years, makes me uneasy and... Good night, Mr. Wondergood. Tomorrow I shall have the honor of presenting you to my daughter, and now you will permit me... and so on. In short, this gentleman conducted me to my room in a most impolite manner and well nigh put me to bed. I offered no resistance. Why should I? I must say that I did not like him at this moment. I was even pleased when he turned to go, but suddenly he turned at the very threshold and, stepping forward, stretched out his large white hands and murmured: "Do you see these hands? There's blood on them. Let it be the blood of a scoundrel, a torturer, a tyrant, but it is the same red human blood. Good night." He spoiled my night for me. I swear by eternal salvation that on that night I felt great pleasure in being a man, and I made myself thoroughly at home in his narrow, human skin. It made me feel uncomfortable in the armpits. You see, I bought it ready-made and thought that it would be as comfortable as if it had been made to measure. I was highly emotional. I was extremely good and affable. I was very eager to play, but I was not inclined to tragedy. Blood! How can any person of good breeding thrust his white hands under the nose of a stranger? Hangmen have very white hands. Do not think I am jesting. I did not feel well. In the daytime I still manage to subdue Wondergood, but at night he lays his hands upon me. It is he who fills me with his silly dreams and shakes within me his entire dusty archive. And how godlessly silly and meaningless are his dreams! He fusses about within me all night long like a returned master, seems to be looking about for something, grumbles about losses and wear and tear, and sneezes and cavorts about like a dog lying uncomfortable on its bed. It is he who draws me in at night like a mass of wet lime into the depth of miserable humanity where I nearly choke to death. When I awake in the morning, I feel that Wondergood has infused 10 more degrees of human into me. Think of it, he may soon eject me altogether and leave me standing outside, he, the miserable owner of an empty barn into which I brought breath and soul. Like a hurried thief I crawled into a stranger's clothes, the pockets of which are bulging with forged promissory notes. No, still worse. It is not only uncomfortable attire, it is a low, dark and stifling jail, wherein I occupy less space than a ring might in the stomach of Wondergood. You, my dear reader, have been hidden in your prison from childhood, and you even seem to like it, but I come from the kingdom of liberty, and I refuse to be Wondergood's tapeworm. One swallow of poison and I am free again. What will you say then, scoundrel Wondergood? Without me you will be devoured by the worms. You will crack open at the seams, miserable carcass. Touch me not. On this night, however, I was in the absolute power of Wondergood. What is human blood to me? What do I care about the troubles of their life? But Wondergood was quite aroused by the crazy Magnus. Suddenly I felt, just think of it, that I am filled with blood, like the bladder of an ox, and the bladder is very thin and weak, so that it would be dangerous to prick it. Prick it and out spurts the blood. I was terrified at the idea that I might be killed in this house, that someone might cut my throat and turning me upside down, hanging by the legs, would let the blood run out upon the floor. I lay in the darkness and strained my ears to hear whether or not Magnus was approaching with his white hands. And the greater the silence in this cursed house, the more terrified I grew. Even Toppy failed to snore as usual. This made me angry. Then my body began to ache. Perhaps I was injured in the wreck, or was it weariness brought on by the flight? Then my body began to itch in the most ordinary way, and I even began to move the feet. It was the appearance of the jovial clown in the tragedy. Suddenly a dream seized me by the feet and dragged me rapidly below. I hardly had time enough to shout. And what nonsense arose before me! Do you ever have such dreams? I felt that I was a bottle of champagne with a thin neck and sealed, but filled not with wine, but with blood. And it seemed that not only I, but all people had become bottles with sealed tops, and all of us were arranged in a row on the seashore. And someone horrible was approaching from somewhere and wanted to smash us all, and I saw how foolish it would be to do so and wanted to shout, "Don't smash them, get a corkscrew!" But I had no voice, I was a bottle. Suddenly the dead lackey George approached. In his hands was a huge, sharp corkscrew. He said something and seized me by the throat. By the throat. I awoke in pain. Apparently he did try to open me up. My wrath was so great that I neither sighed nor smiled nor moved. I simply killed Wondergood again. I gnashed my teeth, straightened out my eyes, closed them calmly, stretched out at full length, and lay peacefully in the full consciousness of the greatness of my ego. Had the ocean itself moved up on me, I would not have batted an eye. Get thee hence, my friend, I wish to be alone. And the body grew silent, colorless, airy and empty again. With light step I left it, and before my eyes there arose a vision of the extraordinary, that which cannot be expressed in your language, my poor friend. Satisfy your curiosity with the dream I have just confided to you, and ask no more. Or does not the huge, sharp corkscrew suit you? But it is so artistic. End of section 3.